All right, hello. This is my thematic anthology presentation. I chose to do my theme as loss without closure. So, this anthology will consist of books that deal with death, grief, and the unanticipated departure of loved ones. These books all explore how those left behind live in the immediate and the long term aftermath of such experiences and the many varied ways we humans can find or create our own closure. And just a quick trigger warning, there will be mentions of suicide in this presentation. All right, so the first book I want to talk about is The Seven Skins of Esther Wilding by Holly Ringland. This book deals with the loss of a sister in a kind of missing persons situation where it is a presumed suicide. In this story, we see the main character, Esther, grapple with guilt following her sister Ara's disappearance and the distance that grew between them prior to this. In her grief, she isolates herself from her family, falls into substance abuse, and essentially closes herself off to the world in an effort to avoid ever being hurt again. She's able to find something like closure, however, when she takes a trip to Denmark, where her sister spent 3 years, and traces her footsteps from Copenhagen to the Faroe Islands, following clues from a journal that her sister left behind. This book deals with the way a sense of belonging is often tied to a person and how loss can shatter that. It also deals with the tug of war between avoidance and acceptance, and the power of processing grief in community and in reclaiming narratives. And yeah, it talks a bit about, living, or it kind of dances around the subject of living life to the fullest in honor of the person you lost rather than giving into like the tendency towards seclusion. And one of my favorite quotes that I read in this book was, "Everything I've wanted most in life has been on the other side of finding the courage to ask for the help I needed." Okay, the next book is Happiness Falls by Angie Kim. This book deals with the loss of a father and another missing person situation, and it's a presumed hiking accident. In this story, the main character's dad goes missing. Her brother Eugene, a young man with autism and a genetic disorder called Angelman syndrome, was the last person with her father. Only he cannot speak due to his disorder, which makes oral communication very difficult. So basically, all the family knows is that Eugene and Adam, who's the dad, went on a routine hike that they go on like every day in a nearby forest, and Eugene returned alone. So the main character, Mia, deals with a lot of guilt for not calling the police sooner or noticing that her dad was missing because she was asleep when her brother came home alone. And the story reads like a mystery. It's full of suspense and anxiety as the investigation surrounding her father's disappearance plays out. This one's a great example of a lack of closure and the ways we respond in the immediate aftermath of something which could very well turn into a tragedy. A lot of times we blame ourselves in an effort to kind of try and regain control or some semblance of it. And we theorize and try to come up with answers like that won't just destroy us. But yeah, ultimately, this book centers around the ways we might not know even our family members as well as we think, and the way that death or disappearance can unravel secrets for better or for worse. Okay, the next one is called How We Named the Stars, and it's a debut novel by Andres and Ordorica. This one deals with loss of a college roommate and lover. This is a book about two college dorm mates, Daniel and Sam, who fall in love over the course of their freshman year, but end up parting ways over the summer because Daniel was not ready to come out. This book is written in the form of a letter from Sam to Daniel after Daniel's untimely death that same summer after they parted ways. This novel explores the fleeting nature of life and of young love and the way it only takes a moment for everything to change irrevocably. It also deals with the grief of lost potential, like when someone dies so young. In his grief, Sam realizes he never stopped loving Daniel, despite the hurt that was caused by the way that they parted, and despite Sam's attempts to forget him. He hears of Daniel's death while visiting his grandfather in Mexico for the summer and falls into a deep depression. Eventually, he writes the letter in an effort to memorialize their precious time together so that he won't forget any of it, and to remind himself Daniel would have wanted him to continue living a beautiful and full life. So, kind of similar to the Seven Skins of Esther Wilding, it has a similar theme of living in honor of the one that you lost. The next one is called The Collected Regrets of Clover by Mikki Bramer. This novel is about a death doula and a recluse named Clover who lives in New York City. And for anyone that's wondering what a death doula is, I'm just going to quote the Google definition. Someone who provides non-medical, holistic support to individuals facing terminal illness or death and their families, focusing on emotional, spiritual, and practical needs during this time. All right, so having lost her parents in an accident as a child, Clover moved in with her grandfather and lived with him until she moved away to college. Her grandfather passes away while she's studying abroad, and she never fully forgives herself for not being there for him. She moves back home and into his apartment when she inherits, and then she never gets rid of any of his belongings or makes the place her own. And the story kind of kicks off, years after this has happened. She's, I think, like 36 years old, and practicing as a death doula. Having always been fascinated with death as kind of this natural part of life that a lot of people seem to find taboo. She becomes a death doula and keeps journals of her clients' regrets, advice, and confessions at the end of their lives. In her spare time, she tries to honor her deceased clients by fulfilling some of the things they regretted not doing in their life. Clover isolates herself in a big city where anonymity is easy and lets her whole life kind of just revolve around her job. But eventually, she meets some people who challenge her to open herself up to life again and all of its possibilities of both joy and pain. One of the quotes that I loved from this book was, "The secret to a beautiful death is to live a beautiful life, putting your heart out there, letting it get broken, taking chances, and making mistakes." All right, the final book I want to share is The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin. This book follows 4 siblings from childhood after they all see a fortune teller and have their death dates predicted to them. They all see the woman like one at a time, and so they don't end up sharing like this information of like their death date with one another. Some of them believe in the prediction, others don't. But the narrative spans decades and basically follows each of them in the months and years leading up to their death. And each time really makes the reader question, like, if they were destined to die at that specific time, or if it was the result of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. For time's sake, I'll just talk about one of the siblings, Clara, the youngest sister. Her and her brother Simon moved to San Francisco together in like the late 70s so she can pursue a career as a magician, and so he can be himself in a time when few cities were safe for queer folks. Simon ends up dying young of AIDS, and Clara never fully recovers from that grief. So she ends up kind of descending into alcoholism, and then eventually like believing that Simon is communicating with her from beyond the grave. And then she eventually takes her own life. Both of them dying on the day that was predicted that they would die. But yeah, it reminded me a lot of The Yellow Wallpaper in the way that you kind of see her mental health devolving slowly. And this book deals with the psychology of loss, the impacts it can have on mental health, substance abuse as a coping mechanism, and the idea of living on borrowed time. I would say mostly it's a pretty depressing book, but there is a hope. I will say there's a hopeful spin on the final siblings story, where she kind of learns to make, again, the most of her life instead of living in fear of like her impending death. All right. Thank you for watching, and I hope that maybe one of these books intrigued you and that you'll read one of them in the future.